Hello, everyone, and happy May 1st. Thanks for joining us. My name is Christine Kennedy, and on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement, I'd like to welcome you to our gardening talk this afternoon, From Soil to Table, Eat Local and Grow Local. Before I introduce our speaker today, Jessica Gale, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that the land on which this webinar is taking place is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Ojibwe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This talk today is our second last talk in our Rejuvenate series, which is being sponsored by our affinity partner, TD Insurance. So I'd like to thank them for their commitment to all our alumni programming. And just a reminder, for every Rejuvenate webinar that you attend, you'll be entered into a random draw to win, or for a chance to win, one of 3 gift cards. We have our sort of spring-themed gift cards, MEC, Terra Greenhouses, or Lee Valley. This webinar today, and we have one tonight on birding. So if you're interested in birding, tune into that one. And then next week, we will pick our 3 winners and let them know. So as always, this talk is being recorded. So if you need to head out, or if you want to share the information with other green thumb friends, feel free to do that once you get the recording. You'll get that later this evening, or sorry, later this afternoon or early this evening. So thanks to those who pre-submitted questions. We had sort of a number of themes. So Jessica has taken some of those and will be answering those at the end before we go into the live Q&A if we have time. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Jessica Gale. Jessica is the project lead at Green Venture, a wonderful environmental not-for-profit organization here in Hamilton. And I've partnered with Green Venture on a number of occasions to provide some wonderful alumni programming. So we're always thankful to our friends at Green Venture for helping us out. And so Jessica is in her farm wearing her overall. She said she picked her favorite farmer chic outfit. But besides being a local farmer here in Hamilton, like I said, she works at Green Venture. She'll let you know a little bit about what she does. Now, for her education, she is not a McMaster grad, but that's okay. She likes McMaster, but she's actually from SUNY, State University of New York, which is in Syracuse, just very close across the border. And she has a Master's of Landscape Architecture, which McMaster does not offer. So that's why she couldn't come to McMaster. And she is also an ecological horticulturist and garden educator, which she's done in Hamilton and Toronto for the last decade or so. So we're very pleased that Jessica is here with us to answer all our gardening questions. Thanks, Jessica, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Christine. Let me just share my screen. We'll get started. Okay, let's see. Give me one moment here. Okay, well, thank you for having me today. This is my work these days is with Green Venture is a little bit different than my farming background. So it was kind of a pleasure to sit down and think about these things that are so near and dear to my heart. And so today's agenda, I also have a little land acknowledgement. I'll just kind of do the last portion of that, a tiny bit more about Green Venture as an organization. We're going to get into things like why local food matters. So we're going to kind of talk about local food as a bigger topic first, and how we can support local food movements. And then we're going to get into like, how can you make the best of the local harvest, whether it's your harvest or if you're purchasing from local farmers. Ways you can do growing yourself. And then 5, well, I couldn't help myself. Maybe there's more than 5 easy edible crops to start with. And so I'm going to try to leave the last bit of time, be generous with it so that we can get through a bunch of your questions because there's a lot of questions around growing. Okay, and so Christine covered a wonderful land acknowledgement, and one of the only things I would add to that, as an organization, we encourage you to support Indigenous-led not-for-profits and organizations with your time, talents, and resources. and consider looking for organizations that perhaps you can purchase garden supplies, plants, or food purchases too. So consider looking into that. There's a number of good local nurseries and food growers that you can consider supporting. So a bit about Green Venture. So our goal is to inspire and equip Hamilton community members to take individual and collective action to preserve our natural environment and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and build a community resilient to climate change. A big focus of what we do is education, whether it's youth or adults, and whether it spans from urban forestry to just learning about nature and experiencing nature for kids, gardening, working on issues like stormwater, which is my area of expertise at Green Venture, and a number of other things. And so, as Christine said, it's now been, I think, about 15 years of me working in the realms of farming and gardening. I've worked in public and private settings, institutional, residential, and commercial, and I've done growing in rural and urban conditions. And my area of expertise is actually in flowers. So I ran a small cut flower farm for 7 years, but I also am very passionate about seed crops, and I love growing vegetables for my family and for my community. And I do a bit of farming still, all on the side of working with Green Ventures. So the first thing that when we're talking about local food, we need to really define what that means. And so the way that's defined in Canada is that it's 50 kilometers from the originating province or territory. So if you're looking at something and it says local, it is following these sort of standards. And so why should we care about local food? And why should we be putting our not only our financial resources, but our time towards sourcing this? And so we're going to go over a few economic, environmental, and health and community reasons. So I think this is some of these things you might already be familiar with, and there's a few I think that don't come up as much in conversation. So one of the big reasons we want to consider supporting local farms with our purchases is that it supports our local economies and this idea of a circular economy, so that our local food businesses and farms, they have local employment, so they are employing people working on the farms, people who are processing food. The local food could be going into local restaurants. There's also people helping out with shipping, people who are supplying farms. So all of these things, when you're purchasing local food, support that local employment. And then these people that are employed are then also putting money back into the local economy to support their lives in the community. The second point, I think, is something that's really top of mind right now with the political situation that we're in Canada, is that when we support local farms, it's helping reduce our reliance on external supply chains. And so that's something to consider. And that, I think the more we support local farms with our purchases, the more they're able to build the capacity to supply us throughout all the seasons, not just in the summer months, especially like greenhouse growers in the wintertime too. When we're buying locally, there's also an opportunity potentially to do things like buying in bulk and various ways of kind of reducing our overall cost. If you're working directly with a farmer or grower, there might be opportunities to do things like bulk buying, buying seconds. So things, say like produce that maybe isn't perfectly shaped or has a little ding, but it's still perfectly good to eat or process. That is something that they can supply potentially at a cheaper cost. And Lastly, when we have good demand for local food, it drives availability and diversity. So, like a crop I'd like to highlight is that a lot of times when we go to the grocery store, when we buy ginger, um, ginger is often coming in from, often I think from Asia. But did you know that ginger can be grown here? We can't grow it to the stage that we see it in the grocery store where it has that kind of skin coating, but we can grow fresh ginger here. And so something that I've seen with a number of local farms over the year is that more and more farms are growing local ginger. And that's because people are interested. And so we can diversify the types of crops that we can purchase by simply buying more of them and showing farmers that there's interest there. Okay, so the environmental reasons are a huge reason to consider why buying local. So you might have heard about your carbon footprint. So hopefully crops that are grown more locally, transported over shorter distances, reduce our carbon footprint. But something else I'd like to point out is that there's a potential for local farms to have better production practices that reduce overall carbon footprint of those farms. So this is a bit of a tricky, like more nuanced piece. There are some farms abroad that can grow things very efficiently, that are at lower, produce less of a carbon footprint. But when you're buying local, you have a chance to talk to your farmers about what they're considering when it comes to climate. Um, Another huge reason that I don't see talked about enough is that when we're buying local food, I think of this especially in Ontario, we're actually keeping good quality agricultural soils in production. And we are also keeping up open space intact. So we have a number of legislations in Ontario to help protect farmland and green space, but Ontario is also growing. And so right now, if farmers don't feel like there is a future in their businesses, there is, the possibility that more farms are going to sell to future development for subdivisions and things like that. And while we need housing, we also need good quality soil to grow our food. So this is something to consider. Another thing I don't see talked about very often is that when we're supporting local farms, we are supporting edible plant genetic diversity. So a lot of times, crops that are grown on really large scale, there's only maybe a few different varieties that are being grown, but when you're supporting especially smaller local farms, you can see a lot more diversity in the types of varietals and cultivars that are being used. So, for instance, when you go to the grocery store, you might see 3 varieties of potatoes. But when you are purchasing from a local farm that's grown it, might have, I don't know, 10 different varieties of potatoes that they're growing. And why that's important is, as we learned through things like the potato famine, that when there is too much of one type or one variety of a plant being grown, there's a possibility for that variety to be greatly affected when it comes to disease and pest pressure. And so we really want to keep genetic diversity of our plant species on the landscape in order to protect us from future crop failure. And also something I find interesting is that when we're investing in local farms and we continue to put our dollars towards farms that have good sustainable practices on their sites, we can potentially also be investing in building and restoring natural lands. So farms can get grant funding with organizations like Ducks Unlimited, The Conservation Authority, also multiple conservation authorities also have grants to support local farms restoring or enhancing natural features. And so there's a possibility for us to improve the quality of our natural lands, supporting our cities through these farms. Okay, and I think a lot of times when we think of local food, we also think about the health benefits. I think it's pretty obvious to everyone that local food is often fresher. It's usually picked and shipped within 24 to 48 hours. So we're getting high quality, good tasting food to use at home. And also, I think an important thing to point out is often we can then pick it at a riper stage. So that also has the ability to increase the nutrient content in the produce. It also just tastes better. And also kind of going with that is that when we're supporting local food, we're supporting local varietals again, where farmers are potentially able to focus more on planting varietals that are, the genetics are more focused on the quality and the flavor of the food versus its transportability. So a lot of times, say you have a tomato that's being grown in, say, Florida, for winter sales up in the north. The main thing that those farmers want when they are picking the varieties of seed that they're going to grow is how well is it going to transport? Because a lot of those tomatoes in Florida, they may go to some local sales, but a lot of them are being shipped. And when you're shipping for things and you're selecting for that transportability, you're selecting for, say, in that tomato, a thicker skin. And so if you've had a tomato with kind of a thick skin, it's not necessarily the tastiest tomato. And those tomatoes need to be shipped and not bruised. And so you're losing things when you select for that transportability in the genetics. And so you lose things like flavor. So, and usually there is a good correlation between flavor and nutrient content. So something that has really good color, really good flavor often is strongly correlated with good nutritional content. Another important thing that, again, I don't hear talked about enough is that when we are buying local, there's less handling of our produce involved. There's less people whose hands are touching that produce because it's going, say it's at a local farm that sells at a farmer's market. Someone is picking that, washing that, packing that, and then bringing it to market. Versus if it's, being transported, like say a lettuce had from California, it can go through multiple hands and multiple stages. And so this is really important because there's a strong correlation between how much a fruit or vegetable is handled and the potential for bacterial and viral contamination. And so, yeah, so that's like, I think, a really strong argument for that. And it's also knowing that we can know and find out what are the standards around health and safety when it comes to the way our produce is grown in Ontario. We can look up that legislation and we can understand what that all entails. And lastly, you can talk to your farmers when you can meet them about what their production methods are like. And as I said, you can read about the regulations that are guiding their production and what that means in terms of what protocols they need to follow in terms of like washing and prepping your produce. And also, I should say, I'm talking a lot about fruits and vegetables. So that's kind of more my area of expertise, but a lot of these same things I think apply to things like dairy and meat and so forth. Okay, so This is, I think, one of actually the strongest arguments for why you should consider buying local is the community aspect. And I think being someone who I wouldn't consider myself a young farmer anymore, but who was a young farmer, is that when you are supporting local agriculture, you're supporting the future of farming. If there's not enough support and farmers feeling like there's a future, whether you're a new farmer like me, I didn't come from a farming family, or if it's a multi-generational farm family where they're hoping that their children are going to carry the farm, they need to feel like there's a future, that they can run their farm, make enough of a living in order to support their families. And so if there isn't that feeling of that support, people are going to get out of farming or never join in the first place. And if we're going to have that level of food security, that we know we can get local food in Canada and not be reliant on external supply chains, we need to have farmers believe that there's a future in the economy for them. So that's, I think, if I could take one, like share one takeaway from these various points, that's actually, I think, one of the most important ones I would highlight. Second point, as I talked about before, you're building a relationship. You're getting to know the face behind your food. And I think that, builds something really beautiful in our communities and makes it personal. I'll just share like a little story. When I used to sell at a farmer's market in Toronto, there are some wonderful fruit vendors. It was at Trinity Beltwood's farmer's market, and there's some wonderful fruit vendors there. And even after I stopped selling at that market, I still drive down to their farm and get fruit in bulk from them because I don't grow fruit. And for instance, when I heard through Facebook that their son was diagnosed with leukemia, I donated to their GoFundMe campaign. Like those are the sort of things that farmers markets can build, is like they build real relationships. Like I care about these people as fellow farmers, but as people who supplied me and my family our fruit, like a good portion of our fruit for a number of years now. So building that relationship is really important. I also think that a community aspect is that our local farms are governed by our labor laws. And I'll say that this isn't a perfect system. There's a lot of room for improvement in terms of labor laws around agriculture in Ontario and Canada in general. We can at least know what those labor laws are. We can talk to people about how they compensate and care for their staff. We can observe that if their staff are happy. Versus when we are buying things from abroad, we really don't know unless you're buying food that's been produced with that like fair trade label. So that's really important because behind a lot of our fruits and vegetables, our food is sometimes really terrible working conditions, especially abroad. So something to consider and read more about. Also, another thing I don't hear talked about enough is that these local food supports investment in public open spaces. So things like our farmers markets are public open spaces that support things like events, music, activities at farmers market. I think about the indoor farmers market at in Hamilton and how that's like a community space. Myself, I take my family there at least once a month to bring my daughter there, and it's a space where she can like walk around, she can see things. And we obviously like to go there and purchase things, but we don't have to. Like it's a community space, and there's so few spaces left in this world that are just free and open spaces where you can be. Okay, but something I want to acknowledge in all of this discussion is that I'm just doing a little time check here for myself. is that food encompasses a lot of issues. Food is personal, food is cultural, it encompasses ethical issues. Food is something of the senses, it's sensual. Food is related to health. Food is even political. So food is complicated. And so I share all these things, and I'm going to share some ideas and suggestions coming up. But in the end, you are your best judge for what's right for you and your family when it comes to your food decisions. And everyone's food decisions are different. So I have some ideas and things that I've learned and shared that I will continue with the rest of this webinar to talk about. But know that like these things are complicated and they bring up like a lot of different emotions for people. So something to consider and think about and be aware of for us. Okay, so some simple ways you can support local food. So community supported agriculture or CSAs. This is where you can purchase a share in a local farm where you pay upfront for, say, 6 weeks or a whole season of usually like vegetables, but there's also CSAs for dairy, meat, flowers, even. And a lot of farms are also adapting to this. They're offering things like subscriptions where you can kind of pick and choose more what you get. CSAs, typically you get kind of like an assigned box every week. So it's a great way to kind of experiment with what you want to grow. But can be a little challenging, especially if you're a smaller family, to use all that produce. But there's different options now. Some farms and local co-ops have things like buying clubs that help you source local produce. Obviously, there's farmers markets, indoors and outdoors ones, farm stands. So taking a nice drive with your family and visiting a local farm. You always want to make sure before you go that you have permission to be there and that they're open. But a lot of farms are now kind of revitalizing this and having like farm stores, which are really fun. And they often will carry things from their own farm, but also from other local farmers. U-Pick can be really great. It's not always like, it's more of an experience. Like, don't look for U-Pick to necessarily be the most affordable option, but it's an experience to bring you and your family out on the land and to do something fun for an afternoon. And then I encourage you to get to know some of these symbols that I shared on this page. There are all sorts of like agricultural organization labeling that can make you aware of what is like local. So there's Egg Farmers of Canada, there's Foodland Ontario, which by the way has a really great website that can tell you what's in season at different times of the year. What other things on Chicken Farmers of Ontario, Wine Growers of Canada. I even saw, I pulled this from just like someone posted it on Instagram. There's even Honey Farmers of Ontario. Like all these farmers are a part of these organizations and use this labeling to help you understand that they are doing this production locally. Okay, some ideas on how to embrace seasonality. So as I said, there's a number of seasonal guides you can refer to online, like Foodland Ontario, like I said, has some really great resources. Start talking to your farmers. Talk to them ahead of time. Ask them, what's coming up? Like, how long do you think until the asparagus crop comes in? Ask them for recommendations on how to cook and look up your recipes in advance. So I know like I am that person that shows up at the farmer's market and I'm just like, oh, there's so much beautiful food. And I buy all these things and then I go home and I'm like, okay, how am I going to cook it? And so don't be like me. Pick out some recipes in advance and talk to your farmers and then you'll know and have a plan. And that way there's less food waste too. Okay. This is something maybe a little controversial. I'm going to encourage you to consider one way to preserve your harvest. So, and invest in maybe potentially a little bit of equipment. So I know we are all very busy, especially, if you have a family, if you are working full time. This can be a bit of the farmer is asking you to do something a little bit complicated. However, this can be very simple. I like to think about what are the crops that are like my must-haves, like that I really just want to have as much of it as possible and either eat as much of it in season as possible, or I want to have it in the winter months to enjoy. And then I think of like one simple way of preserving it. So, like, I'll share with you, and I shared this with Christine, something that I do every year. I love raspberries. I eat so many of them in the summer. I eat as much of them as I can when they're fresh. But then what I do is I go to my friends, the fruit farmers, and I buy a whole flat. I take them home, I spread them out on a cookie sheet with a layer of parchment paper, and I freeze them. I freeze them like all laid out. And then I take them out when they're frozen and I put them in bags. And basically, I buy about 2 flats, and that's enough to last me the entire year with my family for what I'm doing with them. And so there's really simple ways of doing this. Like, I also really love strawberries, and one thing I used to can all sorts of things. I used to make jams, I used to make pickles. Even like, my life is too busy now to even do all that. But for instance, I love having strawberry compote. And so that's something that I get a flat, I make a big batch of strawberry compote, and I freeze it. So there's simple things that you can do. Freezing, I think, is actually one of the most user-friendly, like, easy things to do. You don't necessarily need any special equipment, although I do highly recommend a chest freezer. There's small upright ones that you can do a lot with. But you can do something like drying. Like, I know people who love to go camping, and what they do is they just dry a bunch of fruit to bring with them when they go camping. But one of the things, again, just think about what are the things like you just like every winter in February, you're like, oh, I can't wait for a fresh salad. And just try to think about planning your life a little about maybe you have a salad every day come spring and just like be prepared for that. I love asparagus, so I'm pretty much always have asparagus in my fridge for the entirety of the harvest of that season. Um, and just have really simple solutions for that. And that's a way you can embrace that seasonality and make it simple. Um, and then I just encourage you, just look up a little bit of information on how to store your food properly. I'm a bit of I admit this is something like I need to work on and not rush on so much, but just look up, like, you don't want to toss that asparagus in its plastic bag into the fridge. Asparagus really likes to trim and to be placed in a water cup because it's still actually absorbing water. So things like that, learn how you can store your food properly in the fridge, or if you're, say, keeping potatoes for a little while, how do you do that so that it doesn't go bad? And so the last part of this webinar is I'm going to encourage you to embrace seasonality by growing. So let's start growing. Where can we start? So we can start at home. That's probably the easiest place to start. It's close, it's accessible. You can do it potentially long term, and it can be relatively easy. It can start with something as simple as a pot, a single pot on a sunny window, a porch, a balcony. If you start growing and you are getting excited, it could be a raised bed. There's all sorts of cool kits and stuff now that you can buy. There's a company that I really like called Sproutbox, which literally sends you in a flat box the pieces to make a raised bed that's like a metal galvanized bed. And what's cool is like this was designed so, and I'm not a sales rep from Sproutbox. I just really like them. They the metal is coated in a way that it doesn't get super hot. So anyways, there's like you could build it yourself. You could buy kits and stuff really more affordably now. So you can try growing in a raised bed, which is like take some of the complication around bed prep and stuff out. And then the last thing is like I feel like the new Victory Garden of today is converting your lawn into a garden. So this little illustration here is how you would do something called sheet mulching, which I'm happy to talk about in some more detail. But basically, laying down things like cardboard or newspaper, wetting that down, adding in compost, and then some mulch, and letting that rot down and kill the grass for you. And then it's ready to plant. Sometimes as quick as like 6 weeks to 2 months. You could also consider growing in a community garden. So I actually went down a fun rabbit hole, and I wish I could actually do more of a talk about this, about the origin of community gardens. So they were started, a lot of them, on vacant and unused land as relief gardens during eras like the Great Depression, but also during in connection with wartime gardening. So we always again hear about victory gardens, but also World War I. Also, we did gardens in lots during that time, and so growing food to kind of support people through hard times. So today, community gardens are a really good source for land access. They give you usually bare minimum a garden bed and water access. Sometimes they include things like access to a communal compost, tool sharing, a place like to build compost. So if you have cuttings and stuff, debris coming off of your garden, you can process that. They often have now social spaces. It's a really great place to learn. Sometimes they have some formal programming, but just informal talking to other people is really great. The key thing I find a lot is you have to get on a list, and you have to get on a list early because they're quite popular. So in Hamilton, we have the Hamilton Community Garden Network, but pretty much most cities have some sort of community garden. Even rural areas now have them because people are looking to grow in community and yeah, have that experience learning from others. Another thing you can do in order to learn is to volunteer. There are a number of amazing urban farms across Canada right now. So some more local ones that I know of in Hamilton, there's McQueston Urban Farm, which is also called Nawassa Urban Farm. In Toronto, there's Black Creek Community Farm, and this is a picture of a wonderful farmer I know who runs a farm called Zawadi Farm in Downsview Park. Does amazing things in the city there, an incredible teacher. There's also local farms will have volunteer days, and some local farms do something called WOOF, or Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. And so this is something you could do locally, volunteering on local farms, but you can also travel and learn how to farm or grow. And basically you often get free room and board in exchange for some labor. So I know a number of people that's how they learned to grow initially, is they traveled around the world, stayed on farms, met amazing people, got embedded in the local community, and learned how to grow all at the same time. Okay, so I'm into my top 5, which, like you can see, I didn't stick to 5. Oh, it's too hard. But if I can encourage you to do one thing you walk away and do is to consider growing your own herbs. This can be very simple, starting with things in a sunny location like basil, cilantro, parsley, mint, dill. So easy and such a wonderful thing to just grab and add to any meal that you have. That can be done as easy as in a sunny window. You can also do herbs on a sunny porch or a balcony. You can do things like cherry tomatoes do really great in pots. You can do things like lettuce, maybe not in the most intense sun. Kale, chard, beans, they're all really easy things to start in pots. And there's more that you can start in pots, and I'm happy to talk about that. You can also, looking at this photo, think about using all of your space, and that includes growing vertical. So if you have only a really small space, there's an opportunity to go vertical with things like pole beans, cucumbers. You can even trellis squash. So there's all sorts of things you can grow in pots and go vertical. In raised beds, in-ground growing, great things to start with. Again, those herbs, tomatoes, greens, beans. Root crops are pretty easy if you really like carrots, radish, super simple. Beets, garlic can be quite a rewarding crop to do. Just be careful, test your soil if you're growing in ground. Especially in urban areas, you want to watch out for things like heavy metals like lead. So just test your soil ahead of time. So last couple of slides here. So this is my last challenge to you. I want you all to think about going beyond personal. Your personal, how you spend your money, what you cook with. I want you to think a little bit bigger. So supporting gardens on underutilized land in food deserts. So there's a lot of vacant land out there. Sometimes it's sitting tied up for long periods of time with no plan. There's a lot of gardening organizations, urban farms that want to go in and do things with this land and activate those spaces. So I encourage you to support those organizations with your time and your financial resources. They are really doing amazing work and potentially bringing food into areas where there's not a lot of fresh produce available. Start to learn and follow people who talk about food and farming policy. There's a lot of really important stuff happening politically when it comes to food. Start to build some awareness there. Advocate. This is so big. Advocate for local sourcing of food where you work, but also in the institutions you're a part of. McMaster, think about it. Schools, universities, hospitals, they could be doing stuff to source food locally. Donate to grassroots organizations that are teaching gardening and farming skills, especially to new farmers, to people in part of the BIPOC community, making sure that those skills are learned, especially, and also young people, I think is really important to support those organizations. And then one near and dear to my heart, supporting land access to new farmers. It's a huge, huge, huge barrier for a lot of people who are new to farming to get access to land. Christine misspoke a little bit. I'm actually not speaking to you from my farm. I live in Hamilton in the city. My farm, I rent land, and I've always been a tenant farmer. And that's because I have never been able to afford a farm. And so I was really blessed. We were able to buy a house in Hamilton, but I could not afford to buy a farm. And so I'm really lucky. I've been able to secure long-term lease, but land access is a huge issue for new farmers. Some resources, and maybe I'll leave these up at the end. Foodland Ontario, Greenbelt Foundation, Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario, big shout out to them. Such a key organization for teaching farmers how to grow ecologically. And then resources you can check out to learn how to grow more. Your local library has incredible resources for good books. They often also have seed libraries you can participate in. I really love Monty Don's gardening books. That's just a little thing I would recommend. Garden clubs are a really great thing to join. Master gardener programs. University of Guelph has a number of programs for people wanting to do build their skills. Extension services, which are a little bit more of a thing in the States, but occasionally we can find good resources here in Canada too. And then social media can be quite a wealth of information if you follow some interesting folks. So I'm going to jump right into Q&A, and I'm cognizant of my time. So first question I had, oh, actually, look at me, right on time. So question that was sent to us ahead of time. Oh, Christine, you're here.
I just popped in.
So someone was asking, exploring methods for small space vegetable gardening, balcony containers, suggesting varieties, heritage seeds, varieties that will grow in urban areas, climate zones. Okay, so things you want to look for. I don't know if I'm going to necessarily suggest really specific varieties because it really depends quite a bit what you're looking for, but things to look for. So if you're growing, say, a tomato or things like maybe even if you're delving into like a zucchini or things like that, you want to look for things that are, we would call bush varieties. So like a tomato, you can have an indeterminate variety or you can have a determinate variety. Indeterminate varieties will keep growing and growing and growing and growing. A determinate tomato is going to grow into like a bushy, big bushy kind of plant and then kind of stop there. That's what I would recommend more for these spaces, unless you're willing to put in some trellising. And the one thing I will say with trellises, if you're going to do it on a balcony, just be aware of what your wind conditions are like. You could still do it, just make sure if you have a windy balcony that it's secured, any trellising that you might construct. So things like bush varieties of things, squash that aren't like as much of a big long vining variety. You want stuff that's going to be contained. Dwarf varieties can work really well. Yes, sometimes you'll also see varieties that are called like patio varieties. Those are really good often in pots. But what's amazing is if you have a big enough pot, you can grow almost anything. Even like bushes, trees, depending on your space. The key thing is you want to do some research and reading around how much space they might need to grow in when it comes to that root structure. And especially if you're going to delve into things that are more perennial, that takes a little bit more planning because you need to protect those plants over the winter time. So start easy, start with those tomato plants, start with some greens, and say like if I was going to grow one tomato plant, you're going to want actually a pretty big pot for that. Say, trying to think of what size liter that might be. Probably at least 5 liters. So a good size pot. Don't, if your tomato plant is like this big, you're not going to want a pot that's that big. You're going to want a pot that's like 3 to 4 times the size. But for instance, something like a lettuce, it grows really fast. It's not putting out fruit, so it doesn't need as much soil and for as long a period of time. The main kind of correlation is if you have a plant that's going to be in the pot for a long period of time and particularly produce fruit, so squashes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, those sorts of things, you're going to want a bigger pot and you're going to want a pot that is just really rich soil. So things like lots of compost, that sort of thing, because those plants are going to be absorbing those nutrients over time and they need all those nutrients in order to grow those fruits. So if you have like less space, if you want things to turn over more quickly, maybe stick to things like your greens or herbs that are going to turn over quickly and don't need that same richness of soil. I hope that helps. Mainly urban areas, climate zones, look for things that can, like varieties that particularly like the descriptions say like can take like summer heat, or if you're growing someplace that has a bit of shade, maybe like stuff that is a little shade tolerant. So do some reading. A lot of the descriptions of varieties have really thorough descriptions that can help guide you. How do you start to grow cold weather crops? So I'm guessing this is asking around season extension. So season extension is this idea of either starting things extra early or having them grow later into the fall. So for instance, you could start some kale plants maybe in the fall, or some lettuce or spinach in the fall. You could have it growing in your garden, and you could have it growing potentially where, depending on where you are. Like I'm going to just talk Ontario now. If you're further up north, this might be a little trickier. You can have stuff growing into December now in our region, but what it needs is some protection. So that could be something like a cloche. Again, kind of depends on the scale, a cloche or a cold frame. So like a built kind of structure with either plastic or glass that provides some insulation against frost for your vegetables. But it also can be as simple as using things like frost fabrics. I'm forgetting the other word for it. Grow cover. There we go. So there's these woven semi-opaque fabrics that you can put with hoops over your crops. And they basically help elevate the temperature inside of the hooped area for the plants anywhere from like 2 to 4 degrees. The key things with, if you're going to get into season extension, something a lot of times people don't think about is these structures do the important work of keeping our crops warm enough at night. But the thing we need to remember is actually to take them off sometimes in the daytime, because during really hot sunny days, we can actually like really crisp and dry out, stress out our plants. If it's a really sunny day, that it might be only 30 degrees outside, but inside that, if it's like one of those really bright winter days, that temperature inside of that little cloche can get quite hot. So making sure to crack that or take it off during really sunny days. So those are kind of like the key ways to do cold weather crops. I can go into that a little bit more if anyone has more follow-up questions. Okay, just purchased an 18 by 36 raised garden bed for a deck with legs. So these are really cool. Like I like these beds. They're really great for accessibility. You can be standing when you're gardening instead of bending over, which is really great. So the one thing I would say about these is sometimes they're not really deep. So I would say to this person, it depends. It depends if it's deep enough. You could do like a tomato. You could do a few things in there. I would encourage everyone to, when you're starting out, to look into something called square foot gardening. This is like a really easy thing for new gardeners to try out, and it gives you very precise measurements when it comes to spacing. And so something like this, often I find those tall raised garden beds, they're pretty deep. You're not going to put potatoes in them. I'm trying to think what else. Most things can grow in them, I would say. Most things. So, but look into square foot gardening, and that will help guide how much stuff you can fit in there, because it kind of depends. And what veg can we grow in containers? As I said, pretty much anything. Just depends on the size of this pot and how long it's going to be in there and how well you can protect it if it's going to be perennial over winter. So, Christine, is there any? I think I've got a few more minutes. Let's see. I've got 5 minutes, I think.
Yes,
Any more
and
questions?
we can always, we don't get cut off, and there's lots of questions.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you. Wonderful summary on why we should buy local, and then all of your tips on growing veg. We have some tomato questions.
Oh,
I
yes.
think because people like growing tomatoes, and I have to say, you were talking, I've taken my notes here, about why eating local food is important, because when they transport, and
Mhm.
the variety may change. Anyway, the one thing I notice is tomatoes, right? Like
Mhm.
local
Oh,
tomatoes from the farmer's market come the
night
summer
and day.
can't hold a
I can.
candle
Yeah.
to something that you buy in the grocery store in the middle of winter. Like it's
Yeah.
almost like tomatoes don't even have any flavor. Anyway,
Yeah.
okay, so a few questions on tomatoes, and then we'll get into some other ones. Sorry, I have to get over here. Okay, so Carol Ann is asking how to improve soil to grow tomatoes in the garden, not in
Mm.
pots. So that's one. And then maybe similar is Mary's asking English cucumbers planted close to tomato plants have not done well. Any
Hmm.
suggestions, please? And thank
Mhm.
you.
Okay, so both of those things, I think, both of those questions come down to nutrition, soil nutrition. Tomatoes, we call them heavy feeders. They really love a lot of nutrition in the soil, and so do cucumbers. So, to the second question, I'm guessing that maybe the two of them don't do well together because they're both competing for resources. So, you kind of have two choices with that second question. You can grow them in different spots so they aren't competing with each other, or you need to give them a lot more nutrition. It's also possible, tomatoes and cucumbers, they also get really big, so they could also be competing for light together, depending on how close they are together. But those two things, kind of for the second question, it could be a nutrition thing, it could be a light thing. So either consider growing them in two different spots so they both get the space, nutrients, light that they need, or try adding more compost. So I didn't say this specifically, but I grow organically. The farm that I grow on is partially certified organic, and so I'm a big believer in things like adding lots of good, rich compost to our soils. You can also look into other soil amendments. If you're having you're noticing specific issues with your plants, like say issues with the leaves, like turning weird colors, or fruit not forming properly, you could have some nutrition problems with your soil. But generally, when it comes to tomatoes, I just think they literally can't get enough. Like they are so hungry. So load them up with compost, good quality compost. And honestly, after that, they kind of grow like weeds. So they just want to grow. And another thing that with tomatoes that really helps, just a tip, is if you haven't learned how to prune tomatoes, um, specifically, well, specifically indeterminate varieties, they need pruning. And the pruning is not only for things like air circulation and making them tame them a little so they're easier, but it also forces the plant to put more energy into the fruits and less into green growth. If you're growing a bush tomato, you're not really pruning them. They kind of just get big and bushy, they put out a lot of fruit, and that's what they do. But if you're growing indeterminate varieties that grow really nice and big and tall, you're going to want to learn how to prune. And I could literally spend an entire webinar just talking about tomatoes and including pruning because there's so much to talk about with that. So,
Maybe that's next year's talk. We always do a gardening talk, and they're always very well attended.
yeah, no,
Okay, we have a few more questions that have come in live, so let's get through those
sure.
if we can. You talked about organic. So Francesca's asking, can a produce be considered organic if the seeds have been pre-treated with pesticides?
No, no, yeah. So organic certification is very specific and very defined. The people who say that they are organic, they are not allowed to say they are organic unless they have passed organic certification. And organic certification has very strict parameters around these things. And so, and one of the things is where you source your seed, and your seed has to be actually certified organic. Or if you are sourcing seed that isn't certified organic, you need to prove to the certifying agent that you have done research trying to do your best to source seed that is organic and you couldn't find it. And they would never allow for seed that has been treated with pesticides. Sometimes seeds do have coatings on them, and they will say on the label that this seed has a coating that is like they'll say like EcoCert approved or Omni approved. And that's usually not to do, the coatings are usually not to do with, they're never pesticides or anything like that. They are to help things germinate usually. It's for ease of sowing or for helping plants germinate better. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Francesca, for that question. Linda asked a question. First of all, she makes a comment. Thanks for all this information. Really good points. I hadn't considered about supporting local farmers, so that's wonderful. Linda grew up on a farm and continues to have an urban veggie garden, but she's been having lots of damage from the locals. Deer, locals meaning deer, raccoons, squirrels, our furry friends.
Yeah.
She's had to cage in her vegetable patch, but do you have any other tips for urban farming with
Yeah. Oh man. If someone can figure out the secret to keeping squirrels from creating devastation in our gardens, they would be a billionaire. Because, like, honestly, it is the hardest thing. Deer, there is no way around deer. If you live in an area where there are deer browsing on a regular occasion, there is no solution but a really tall fence. And that's a sad kind of fact. Like I am from upstate New York originally, like deer heaven. Like we would regularly see, like I grew up in a rural area, like herds of deer, like 20, 30 deer. It's crazy. And the only way to keep them out is a really tall fence. But if you're in a more urban area and it's like occasionally they stop by, maybe just like a decent fence they can't jump into. Deer also won't jump into spaces that are really small. So like say your garden is only, I don't know, a few meters by a few meters, even a small fence will keep them, as long as they literally can't like reach their heads over and like munch inside, they won't attempt to jump into that space because they're nervous about getting stuck. Squirrels. Raccoons are just like, I don't find raccoons are as much of an issue. You want to be more careful with like leaving things that they're going to get into, like compost piles. So securing any food sources against them. But if they really want to get in and eat things, they're pretty hard to stop. I personally find that that is less common of an issue. Squirrels. They are the most, they're so cute and they're so annoying because they have this habit of digging. Digging is like the number one issue that I've found in urban gardens is they dig and they bury things. And so things you can try, caging things until plants get to be a good size where they're not going to get damaged by squirrels if they are digging. I have on a small scale I've used sprays that I've made with hot peppers, even just sprinkling cayenne pepper, which just be aware if you have kids or other animals like pets, just be careful because you don't want them to touch that and then touch their faces or sniff that and get it on their nose. But I do use that, like the squirrels always dig in my pots on my front porch. And so sometimes I sprinkle some cayenne pepper on the soil to just deter them. If you are, for instance, planting bulbs, you can always put down chicken wire or things to prevent them from digging them up and eating the bulbs. I've even heard, and we're going to try. I volunteer with something called the Children's Garden Project in Hamilton, and we are in Gage Park. And it literally, we have watched people feed the squirrels like 10 feet away from us, and we have a huge squirrel problem. And one of the things we're going to test this year, and you could have Christine ask me, and I'll circle back and tell you if it works. I've heard that if you put down rubber snakes in your garden, they think they're real snakes and will stay away. But you have to move the snakes every so often so that they actually believe that they're real. So we're actually going to try that. We're going to try that this year. So literally, I was having our executive director purchase rubber snakes. So I think that's my best advice around critters. So
Rubber snakes. Okay, maybe a big rubber chicken as well with
yeah.
big eyes looking at the squirrels.
Yeah.
Okay, quickly, two more questions because I want to get through these. What's the best way to grow? Sherilyn is asking, what's the best way to grow potatoes in the soil? I have black soil, but my crops are small. How does one mound the plant? How
Mhm.
deep to plant the tuber?
Yeah, so potatoes you can do a few different ways. I'm going to go over a couple of solutions. So first, if you're doing it in the soil, kind of a misnomer is the thought that you have to plant potatoes really deep. You don't. You can dig down. When we plant potatoes on the farm, we dig down mm, maybe about like 8 inches or so. We make like a trench and we plop the potatoes in, we bury them. I would say one thing to do before all that is potatoes are also heavy feeders. They really like a lot of nutrition in the soil also. And after you grow a potato crop, you want to consider um, putting some additional nutrition back into that soil the next season. And you definitely don't want to follow, say, like grow your potatoes and then grow them there in the same spot again and again and again. Because one, it really depletes the soil. Two, you're asking for trouble when it comes to blight and other diseases. And three, you don't want to probably follow like a potato crop, follow it with like a tomato crop, or vice versa, because they take a lot of nutrients from the soil. So you might want to take a break in that area, either making sure you compost a lot and following it with a plant that doesn't take as much nutrition, like leafy green, for instance. So, anyways, going back to our steps, so we composted our soil, we dug our trench, we plopped our potatoes, we buried them. So as the potatoes come up and you start to see the shoots, by the time they're maybe like, mm, I don't know, like say as tall as my hand, you're going to want to bury them. And you just want to leave a little bit of the leaves on top. So a lot of times people will hill them. So going kind of either if they're in a mound, kind of planting them up in a mound, or if they're in rows, digging out like the sides and burying them up so that just a tiny bit of the greens are showing. And you want to keep doing that. The more often you like, the more you keep up with it, the more potatoes you're going to have. But if you even just do it twice, that will get you quite a few potatoes. Because what's happening is as you're mounding that up, is triggering the plant to actually start putting out shoots and like roots to form the tubers. So if you don't do that mounding process, you'll get very few potatoes because the potatoes don't really want to push down into the soil and send out those roots and tubers. They really like that mounding effect. One last thing I'll say is you don't have to grow potatoes in the ground. I've successfully grown potatoes in really big bags.
Oops, I think maybe uh, Jessica froze. So maybe we lost her internet. Jessica, are you there? So maybe that this is the natural time. I'm sorry, Rex, we didn't get to your question about spring onions, but I think yeah, Jessica's still frozen. So I think I'm going to call call our webinar to the end there. So thank you. Well, first of all, thanks to Jessica, who I think maybe we just lost as well. So I'm thinking something happened with her internet. So thanks, Jessica. Thank you to all of you who tuned in today. Hopefully you are now more aware about why we should buy local. And for those of you who have green thumbs, hopefully you now have some more support and resources in your gardening adventures this year. I wanted to let you know, as I mentioned, this is the second last Rejuvenate talk in our series. So tonight at 7 p.m. we have a talk on birding. It is birding basics, and there we go, birding, thank you Dave, birding basics and beyond with Caleb Scholes. And then we also have a really interesting event, May 21st, I believe, on climate change and natural disasters. We have 4 researchers and 4 panelists who are going to be interviewed by Anthony Morgan, who is a McMaster grad, and he is the host of CBC's Nature of Things. So feel free to tune into that as well. And I think that is all I have to say. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great day and good luck with all of your gardening this spring.